Today, we are going to talk about a case that not only shakes the heart but also exposes an ancient tradition and inhumane mindset. This is the story of a young woman who had been living with her husband for a year. But when they discovered that the husband was infertile and could never become a father, a deep silence and sorrow crept into their relationship. In the midst of this, the woman was forced to make a decision that would be extremely difficult for any wife. Her father-in-law, in a shocking and disturbing twist, suggested a horrifying solution, one that could only lead to destruction. Why was such a decision made? And what did it lead to for this family? Today, we will uncover the dark truth behind this disturbing case. Our story takes place in a small, quiet town tucked away in the countryside. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and life moves at a slow, steady pace. In this town, family values are everything. Generations live under the same roof, and traditions are passed down like sacred rules. Elders hold the most power, and their word is often seen as law. Here, the pressure to have children and carry on the family name is immense. A couple without children is often looked down upon, whispered about behind closed doors. This is the world our characters lived in, a place where societal expectations and family honor mean more than individual happiness. In this quiet town lived a couple, Sita and her husband, Ravi. Sita was a gentle, loving woman in her mid-20s, with dreams of a simple, happy life, one where she could raise a family and live peacefully with her husband. Ravi, on the other hand, was a reserved man, known for his calm and hard-working nature. He tried his best to provide for his family, but there was one thing he couldn't give Sita: a child. After a year of trying and numerous doctor visits, the harsh truth emerged: Ravi was infertile. Then there was Prakash, Ravi's father. Prakash was an old-fashioned man, deeply rooted in traditional family values. In their town and within the family, he was highly respected, and his word was rarely questioned. For him, having a grandson to carry on the family name wasn't just a desire, it was essential. The pressure on Sita and Ravi was mounting, and Prakash's influence would soon lead them down an unimaginable path. Despite their efforts to move forward, the growing weight of not being able to have children began to strain Sita and Ravi's marriage. Prakash, who could see the struggle and disappointment on their faces every day, decided to intervene. But what he proposed was not a solution anyone would have expected. In the shadows of the family's traditional values, a dark and twisted plan was about to take shape, one that would challenge everything Sita believed in and drag the entire family into a spiral of lies and betrayal. Prakash was determined to see his bloodline continue, even if it meant crossing boundaries no one should. What happened next would uncover the depths of manipulation, control, and the lengths one could go to protect family honor, at any cost. Sita and Ravi's journey began with dreams of a happy family, but as the months passed without a pregnancy, hope turned into despair. They tried to stay optimistic, tracking cycles and seeking advice, but every doctor visit brought painful news. As negative results piled up, the pressure from family and friends grew unbearable. In their community, a childless couple faced constant scrutiny, and Sita felt the weight of those judgments. Ravi, feeling inadequate as a husband, grappled with his own sense of failure. Their once joyful home turned into a place of quiet sorrow, with each dinner serving as a reminder of their unfulfilled dreams. As they struggled to support one another, the emotional distance between them began to widen. The struggle with infertility took a significant emotional toll on both Sita and Ravi. For Sita, each month brought a wave of disappointment and heartache. She felt inadequate and questioned her worth as a woman, haunted by the whispers of family and friends who expected her to become a mother. The weight of societal pressure weighed heavily on her shoulders, leaving her feeling isolated in her pain. Ravi, too, battled his own demons. As the man in the relationship, he felt a profound sense of failure for not being able to provide what every husband is expected to offer: a child. The disappointment of each negative test gnawed at his self-esteem, leading to feelings of shame and frustration. He wanted to be strong for Sita, but he often felt helpless, unable to fix what seemed broken in their lives. As they tried to support each other, the emotional strain created an invisible barrier between them. Conversations that once flowed easily turned into discussions filled with tension and sadness. Both felt a growing sense of loneliness, struggling to articulate their fears and frustrations. Their shared dream of a family began to feel like a distant fantasy, leaving them to navigate their grief in silence. In Sita and Ravi's community, the importance of having children was deeply rooted in cultural values. In their small town, a family was often defined by its children, and couples without kids faced relentless scrutiny. Family gatherings and social events became battlegrounds where questions about their childlessness loomed large, with relatives frequently asking, "When are you planning to have a baby?" Or "Is everything okay between you two?" Sita felt the weight of these inquiries like a heavy burden. Every time she smiled at her friends' children, a pang of longing struck her heart. The societal expectation to become a mother created an invisible barrier between her and other women, leaving her feeling isolated. In her culture, motherhood was seen as a woman's ultimate achievement, and without it, she feared she would be judged and pitted. Ravi, too, felt the societal pressure intensify. As the man, he faced expectations to carry on the family name and provide heirs to the lineage. The constant reminders of his inability to fulfill this role left him grappling with shame and anger. He could sense the disappointment in his father's eyes and the whispers of others in the community, making him feel like a failure. This societal pressure not only strained their marriage but also deepened their emotional wounds, forcing them into a cycle of despair and frustration as they longed for the one thing everyone else seemed to take for granted: a family. As the months turned into a year, Ravi's frustration grew. The burden of infertility weighed heavily on him, and he often found himself caught in a cycle of anger and helplessness. Every failed attempt to conceive felt like a personal defeat, and he struggled to understand why this was happening to them. Instead of communicating his feelings, he often bottled them up, believing he had to be the strong one for Sita. This unexpressed frustration began to seep into their daily lives. Small disagreements turned into heated arguments, often over trivial matters. Sita noticed Ravi's short temper and withdrawal, feeling as if the emotional distance between them was widening. What had once been an open and supportive relationship was now marred by tension and silence. Ravi, feeling overwhelmed, began to blame himself, believing he was the reason for their struggles. He felt guilty for not being able to give Sita the family they both longed for. Instead of comforting her, he withdrew further, convinced that his presence only reminded her of their shared pain. Sita, on her part, felt lonely and frustrated. She longed for his support but found him increasingly distant. The love they once shared began to feel strained as both struggled to cope with their grief and frustration. The weight of their unfulfilled dreams started to overshadow the affection they had for each other, leaving both wondering if they would ever find their way back to the joy they once knew. Amidst the growing tension in Sita and Ravi's marriage, Prakash, Ravi's father, decided to intervene. One evening, after sensing the couple's struggles, he called them into his study for a serious discussion. With a grave expression, he leaned forward and made a shocking proposition: "Sita should bear a child with me. This way, you can have the family you desire without shame or delay." Sita was stunned into silence, her heart racing as the implications of his words sank in. Ravi's face turned pale, a mixture of disbelief and anger flooding his mind. How could his father suggest such a thing? But Prakash, unfazed by their reactions, began to rationalize his reasoning. In Prakash's eyes, the cultural importance of having children justified his proposal. He believed that preserving the family name was paramount, and a grandson was not just a hope but an obligation. In his twisted logic, he viewed Sita as merely a vessel to carry on the lineage. "This is a common practice in our culture," he insisted. "Many families have done this to ensure their legacy. Think of the respect it will bring to our family." He spoke of the pressures they faced, the gossip that surrounded childless couples, and the shame that would come with it. Prakash believed he was offering a solution to their suffering, not understanding the depth of betrayal his proposition entailed. For him, family honor outweighed the emotional bonds between a husband and wife. He failed to see how such a proposal would shatter the very foundation of love and trust that Sita and Ravi had built. This shocking suggestion marked the beginning of a dark and twisted path, forcing Sita and Ravi to confront their deepest fears and desires as they navigated the fallout from Prakash's callous reasoning. As Sita sat in stunned silence after Prakash's shocking proposition, a storm of emotions raged within her. Loyalty to her husband, Ravi, battled against her deep desire to become a mother. The very thought of betraying her marriage sent waves of fear coursing through her. Yet, the relentless ache of longing for a child loomed larger than ever. Sita felt trapped in a web of cultural expectations and personal dreams. Every day, she had imagined the joy of cradling her own baby, but now that dream seemed more distant than ever. The pressure from her family and society only intensified her desperation. In a culture that valued motherhood above all, the shame of remaining childless gnawed at her soul. Could she go through with her father-in-law's proposal? Sita wrestled with the implications of such a decision. The fear of losing Ravi's love, the guilt of betraying him, and the crushing desire for a child created a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She envisioned the future, a potential son who could carry on the family name, yet the cost of that future weighed heavily on her heart. After sleepless nights and countless tears, Sita faced a painful decision. She realized that this could be the only way to fulfill her dreams of motherhood, despite the potential for irrevocable damage to her marriage. With a heavy heart and a mix of fear and desperation, she resolved to go along with Prakash's plan, believing it was the only way to find happiness in a world that seemed to have forsaken her. After the shocking proposition from Prakash, Sita was engulfed in a storm of conflicting emotions. The longing for motherhood burned brightly within her, battling against the revulsion of what her father-in-law was suggesting. She felt an overwhelming sense of disgust at the idea of being intimate with Prakash, the man she had always viewed as a father figure. At the same time, the societal pressure to have children loomed large in her mind. In her culture, being childless brought shame, and Sita felt the weight of that expectation pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. As Prakash began to manipulate the situation, Sita found herself caught in a web of guilt and helplessness. He framed his proposal as a way to preserve the family honor, using words that twisted around her conscience. "Think of what a gift this could be for our family," he would say, trying to soften the reality of his suggestion. Each time she listened to him, her disgust grew, yet so did her desperation for a child. Sita felt trapped, torn between loyalty to her husband and the fear of living in a world where she would always be seen as a failure for not fulfilling her role as a mother. Ravi, on the other hand, remained largely passive during these discussions. His own feelings of inadequacy clouded his judgment. Although he was aware of his father's intentions, he found it difficult to speak up. The societal pressure to maintain a strong front made him feel he had to prioritize family honor over his own emotions. He believed that by not opposing Prakash, he was somehow shielding Sita from more pain and disappointment. This internal conflict left him feeling helpless, as he couldn't bear the thought of further burdening his wife. As days passed, Sita's emotional turmoil only deepened. The desire for a child became an overpowering force, slowly pushing aside her feelings of disgust and guilt. Each night, she wrestled with her thoughts, and eventually, the weight of her longing for motherhood led her to a painful conclusion. She felt as though she had no choice but to submit to Prakash's plan. The hope of finally holding a child in her arms overshadowed the cost of betrayal, leading her down a path she never thought she would take. In her heart, she hoped that perhaps in time, the love for that child would help heal the wounds inflicted on her marriage and her spirit. The moment Sita confirmed her pregnancy, a wave of initial relief washed over her. After months of heartache and longing, the news felt like a miracle, a dream finally coming true. She felt a flicker of joy at the thought of becoming a mother, imagining the happiness that a child would bring to her life and her marriage. Ravi, too, expressed a sense of relief and excitement, unaware of the complex web of emotions that lay beneath the surface. The family celebrated, with Prakash beaming with pride, feeling that his plan had worked flawlessly. However, as the days turned into weeks, the initial joy began to fade, replaced by a heavy emotional and psychological toll. Sita found herself trapped in a whirlwind of conflicting feelings. The reality of her situation sank in. She was carrying her father-in-law's child. Each kick from the baby inside her served as a painful reminder of the betrayal she had committed against Ravi. Guilt gnawed at her, especially during quiet moments when she would look into her husband's eyes. What was meant to be a joyous occasion now felt tainted, overshadowed by the dark circumstances of its conception. Ravi's emotions became increasingly complicated as well. While he was happy about the pregnancy, he sensed a growing distance between himself and Sita. The joy he once felt was clouded by an unshakable feeling of betrayal. Deep down, he struggled to reconcile his love for his wife with the knowledge of her involvement with his father. As Sita's pregnancy progressed, Ravi's internal conflict created a barrier between them, making it harder for him to be supportive. He often withdrew into himself, unable to voice his discomfort, which only added to Sita's feelings of isolation and despair. The strain on their marriage intensified, and the once strong bond they shared began to fray. Conversations became stilted, filled with unspoken words and hidden resentments. Sita felt increasingly alone in her struggle, grappling with the consequences of her decision while trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the sake of the baby. Family relationships also became strained, as Prakash reveled in his role as a grandfather, blissfully unaware of the turmoil simmering beneath the surface. As Sita's due date approached, the emotional weight of the situation grew heavier. She was caught in a cycle of guilt and longing, yearning for the love and family she had once envisioned but feeling trapped by the reality of her choices. The pregnancy, which had initially brought hope, had turned into a constant reminder of her betrayal, further complicating her relationships with Ravi and Prakash. What was supposed to be a joyful new beginning had instead become a painful reminder of the dark secrets they all harbored. As Sita's pregnancy progressed, subtle hints began to surface that something was amiss. Despite the initial joy surrounding the news, an undercurrent of tension lingered within the family. Friends and relatives noticed the shift in Sita and Ravi's demeanor. Conversations that once flowed freely became stilted, and laughter was often replaced by silence. Whispers spread through the community, with neighbors exchanging knowing glances and questioning the sudden happiness of the couple. Family gatherings that had once been joyous celebrations turned into uneasy affairs. Relatives often found themselves exchanging furtive glances, their conversations laced with double meanings as they speculated about the nature of Sita's pregnancy. The old ladies of the community, armed with their traditional beliefs and a penchant for gossip, began to weave stories that ranged from concern for Sita's well-being to outright suspicion about the true paternity of the child. This only heightened the strain in Sita and Ravi's relationship, as both became increasingly aware of the scrutiny surrounding them. The tension reached its peak with the arrival of the child. The moment Sita held her baby in her arms, the world around her shifted. It should have been a moment of pure joy, yet as she looked into her child's eyes, a wave of guilt and dread washed over her. Ravi, too, experienced a profound mix of emotions. The child, a beautiful baby boy, symbolized both hope and despair. While he felt an overwhelming urge to love and protect his son, he could not shake the nagging doubts and suspicions that had begun to surface in his mind. The dynamics within the family began to change dramatically after the birth. Prakash stepped into the role of a proud grandfather, showering affection on the baby while maintaining an unsettling distance from Sita. His behavior only fueled Ravi's insecurities, as he struggled to accept the reality of their situation. He often found himself watching Prakash interact with the child, grappling with feelings of jealousy and betrayal. Sita, now torn between her loyalty to her husband and the affection she felt for the child, felt more isolated than ever. As days turned into weeks, the community's whispers grew louder. The neighbors' gossip became impossible to ignore, and the pressure on Sita and Ravi mounted. They faced questions that dug into their already fragile relationship, forcing them to confront the dark secrets they had tried to keep hidden. The joy of the child's birth, meant to bring the family together, instead served as a catalyst for unraveling the tangled web of lies and betrayal that had formed around them. With every interaction, the tension grew, and the weight of their secrets threatened to crush them. Sita, burdened by her guilt, and Ravi, filled with suspicion, found themselves standing at a precipice, where the love they once shared now felt overshadowed by the darkness that surrounded them. The birth of their son marked a turning point, leading them deeper into a maze of emotional turmoil, uncertainty, and confrontation as they navigated the consequences of their choices. The truth was bound to come out eventually, and it happened when an unexpected visitor arrived at their home. One afternoon, while Sita was caring for the baby, her aunt Meera stopped by to see her. Meera had always been close to the family and was known for her keen intuition. As she entered the house, she immediately sensed the tension hanging in the air. Sita greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and Meera's instincts kicked in. Over tea, Meera's probing questions gradually revealed cracks in Sita's carefully crafted facade. She noticed the way Sita flinched when asked about the baby's father and how Ravi's smiles rarely reached his eyes. As the conversation unfolded, it became clear that something was deeply wrong. Meera's curiosity grew, and despite Sita's attempts to deflect, she sensed the underlying currents of guilt and fear. Unable to contain her suspicions any longer, Meera confronted Sita. "You can't hide this forever, Sita. Is this child really Ravi's?" The question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Sita's heart raced, and panic surged within her. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, Ravi walked into the room, having overheard the last part of the conversation. The moment Ravi entered, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. His face was a mask of confusion and hurt as he looked from Sita to Meera. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. The truth hung heavy in the room, and Sita felt the walls closing in on her. Meera, seeing the opportunity to unearth the truth, didn't hesitate to speak. "Ravi, I was just asking Sita about the baby. There are rumors." Before she could finish, Ravi turned to Sita, his expression a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Is our child really?" The accusation in his tone pierced through Sita's heart. She felt the weight of his gaze, filled with pain and anger, and she knew she could no longer hide. With tears streaming down her face, Sita confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Ravi. I did it with your father." The admission shattered the fragile silence, and the impact of her words hit Ravi like a tidal wave. "How could you do this to me?" he shouted, his anger boiling over. "You betrayed our marriage. You betrayed me." Prakash, who had been listening from the hallway, entered the room just as the confrontation escalated. His face paled as he realized what was unfolding. "What's happening here?" he asked, feigning innocence. But his presence only intensified the tension. Sita turned to him, her voice shaking with rage and hurt. "You manipulated me. You made me believe this was the only way." "Don't you dare blame me," Prakash shot back, his voice rising. "You were the one who agreed to it. You were desperate for a child." The blame shifting continued as the room filled with accusations and denials. Ravi's anger was directed at both Sita and Prakash, unable to comprehend how they could betray him so deeply. Sita, feeling cornered, shifted her anguish towards her father-in-law, realizing how she had been trapped in his twisted logic. The emotional breakdowns were raw and powerful. Ravi, once the pillar of strength, crumpled under the weight of his shattered dreams. Sita fell to her knees, sobbing, as the gravity of her actions washed over her in waves of regret. Prakash, trying to maintain control, could only watch as his family unraveled before him. The confrontation became a cacophony of hurtful words, accusations, and blame, leaving them all feeling more lost and broken than ever. As the dust settled, the fragile bonds of trust that had once held this family together lay in tatters. The consequences of their choices echoed in the silence that followed, marking a turning point in their lives that would forever change the course of their family. The confrontation left a raw wound within the family, and the air was thick with unresolved anger and betrayal. As days passed, the tension simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. Ravi, tormented by feelings of inadequacy and betrayal, found himself spiraling into a dark place. Each glance at his son reminded him of the pain inflicted by Sita and Prakash, intensifying his feelings of rage and helplessness. One evening, unable to contain the storm brewing inside him, Ravi confronted Prakash in the living room. The air was heavy with unsaid words as Ravi's heart raced. "You took everything from me," he spat, his voice a mixture of anger and despair. Prakash, who had initially adopted a facade of calmness, felt the walls closing in. "You don't understand, Ravi," he tried to explain, but Ravi cut him off, his face flushed with fury. In a moment of overwhelming emotion, Ravi snapped. The years of pent-up frustration and pain surged to the surface like a volcano ready to erupt. He lunged at Prakash, grabbing a nearby lamp and swinging it with all his might. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the room as the lamp fell to the floor, but it was not just an object that broke, it was the last remnants of their familial bond. Prakash, caught off guard, stumbled back, trying to shield himself from his son's wrath. "Ravi, stop," he shouted, but the words fell on deaf ears. The psychological unraveling of Ravi had taken a tragic turn. In that moment, blinded by rage and pain, he did not see his father as a man, but rather as the source of all his suffering. The chaos of emotions inside him culminated in an act that would alter their lives forever. In the struggle that ensued, Ravi's anger turned into something darker. With a sudden, intense resolve, he pushed Prakash hard against the wall. The elder man's head struck the corner sharply, and he fell to the ground, unconscious. Ravi stood over him, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. In that instant, a chilling realization washed over him. He had crossed an irrevocable line. Sita, who had been in the kitchen preparing a meal, rushed in upon hearing the commotion. Her heart sank as she saw her husband hovering over Prakash's motionless body. "What have you done?" she cried, panic surging through her veins. Ravi, still in a state of shock, could only stare at his father, the gravity of his actions slowly dawning on him. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Sita's heavy breaths and the distant ticking of the clock, marking the time of their lives that would never be the same again. The emotional toll of the moment was overwhelming for Sita. She felt torn between the man she loved and the father she had betrayed. The weight of their choices settled heavily upon her shoulders, and she could feel her world crumbling. The reality of their situation became starkly clear. This act was not just a moment of rage, it was the culmination of years of emotional turmoil and despair. As Ravi stepped back, horror washed over his face. He realized he had not only harmed his father, but had also destroyed the last remnants of their family bond. Sita sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face as she contemplated the tragedy that had unfolded. The psychological unraveling that had begun with her desperate choices now reached a devastating climax, leaving them all to grapple with the consequences of their actions. In that single moment of violence, their lives were irrevocably altered, and the crime that had been committed was not just physical but deeply rooted in the emotional scars that had festered over time. The family that once celebrated life together was now shattered, leaving them to confront the haunting aftermath of their choices and the dark reality that had unfolded. In the wake of the tragic incident, the atmosphere in the household shifted drastically. The weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air, and the grim reality began to set in. Sita, overwhelmed by grief and fear, felt the walls closing in around her. It was only a matter of time before law enforcement would arrive. The cries of the neighbors had attracted attention, and soon the sound of sirens pierced the heavy silence that had enveloped their home. As the police entered, the gravity of the situation became painfully clear. Ravi, still in shock, found himself in a haze, unable to comprehend the consequences of his actions. Officers questioned him about what had transpired, their faces etched with concern and confusion. Sita stood off to the side, her heart racing as she watched the scene unfold. She felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness, trapped in a nightmare of her own making. Once the initial investigation was underway, the details began to unravel. Prakash was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He succumbed to his injuries, leaving Ravi and Sita to face the harsh reality of what had happened. The tragedy of losing a father and husband hung over them like a dark cloud, but the implications of Ravi's actions soon became clear. He was now facing murder charges. As the case progressed through the legal system, the courtroom became a battleground. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of a man driven to madness by betrayal and despair. Ravi's emotional state was laid bare for all to see, his anger and pain dissected under the scrutiny of the law. The defense argued that his actions were a result of intense psychological strain, emphasizing the years of turmoil within the family leading up to that fateful night. Public reaction to the case was swift and intense. The story captivated the community, and soon it made headlines across the country. Sensationalized accounts of the affair, the murder, and the subsequent trial dominated local and national news. People were divided. Some sympathized with Ravi, viewing him as a victim of circumstance, while others condemned his actions, labeling him as a monster who had taken a life in a fit of rage. Sita found herself at the center of a media frenzy, thrust into the spotlight she never wanted. Interviewers camped outside the courthouse, and social media erupted with opinions, speculations, and harsh judgments. She felt trapped in a fishbowl, scrutinized for the choices that had led to this moment. In interviews, she struggled to articulate the complex emotions swirling within her, haunted by the memories of love and betrayal that had defined her life. As the trial unfolded, the emotional toll on everyone involved was profound. Ravi faced the weight of the evidence against him, each day in court a reminder of the destruction he had caused. Sita's heart broke for the man she once loved, who was now a shadow of himself, caught in a web of regret and sorrow. Their dreams for a family lay in ruins, overshadowed by the grim reality of a courtroom battle and the loss of a father. The final verdict came down like a gavel striking the truth. Ravi was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, sentenced to a lengthy prison term that would strip him of the chance to raise his son. The judge's words felt like a death knell, echoing in Sita's ears as she grappled with the weight of the sentence. The family had been shattered, their lives irrevocably changed by a series of choices that spiraled out of control. In the end, the aftermath of the crime was marked not just by legal consequences, but by a profound emotional fallout that would linger for years to come. Sita was left to navigate a world without Ravi and Prakash, raising their son alone while battling the scars of betrayal, loss, and the haunting memories of a family torn apart. As the dust settled from the harrowing trial, the consequences of the crime reverberated throughout the lives of everyone involved. Ravi sat in his prison cell, grappling with the weight of his actions. The realization that he had taken the life of his father, and in doing so, shattered his family, was a burden he would carry for the rest of his life. Behind bars, he reflected on the emotional turmoil that had consumed him, realizing too late that anger and despair could lead to devastating choices. The dreams of a happy family, once filled with hope and laughter, had been replaced by a grim reality marked by guilt and regret. Sita, left to pick up the pieces, faced the daunting task of raising their son alone. She carried the scars of betrayal and loss, forever haunted by the decisions that had led her family to this point. The love she had once felt for both Ravi and Prakash had been twisted into a narrative of pain, leaving her grappling with questions of loyalty and guilt. As she navigated her new life, She also had to confront the reality of the secrets that had driven her to the edge, a truth that now weighed heavily on her heart. The community, too, bore the scars of this tragedy. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, their discussions tinged with a mix of sympathy and horror. The incident served as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked desires and the suffocating grip of societal pressure. Families that once seemed strong and united now reflected on their own vulnerabilities, wondering how far they would go to uphold traditions or meet expectations. The whispers of gossip transformed into lessons of caution, echoing through the town long after the headlines faded. As the years passed, the story of Ravi, Sita, and Prakash became a cautionary tale about the destructive power of secrets. The hidden truths that had festered in the shadows ultimately unleashed a whirlwind of chaos that shattered lives and strained relationships. Cultural and family pressures, meant to guide and protect, instead became a suffocating weight that led to tragedy. The need to conform to societal expectations had driven Sita to make choices that she believed were for the greater good, only to find herself in a nightmare from which there was no escape. In the end, this tragic story serves as a poignant reminder of the delicate balance between tradition and individual desires. It highlights the importance of open communication and the need for families to address underlying issues before they spiral out of control. The emotional toll of secrets and societal pressures can be devastating, leaving scars that last long after the events have faded from memory. As the community continued to heal, the lessons learned from this tragedy would linger in the hearts of those who remained. They were left to ponder the complexities of love, loyalty, and the human condition, hoping that by acknowledging their own struggles, they could prevent such a darkness from enveloping their lives again. The story of Ravi, Sita, and Prakash would serve as a haunting reminder of how easily the fabric of a family could unravel, leaving behind only sorrow and regret.